The distinctive feature of this panel is that this is about the future. We are looking at Brazil, we are looking at its presidency, we are looking at it from various perspectives, both how Brazil looks at it, and also we have a Latin American perspective here, and also perhaps I'll chip in with my sense of where this is going. So a very interesting conversation where we are today, and how we look at continuing this conversation that we have had, not only the past few days, but also this entire year, and perhaps also in Indonesia, under the Indonesian presidency, something that we have been talking about, this continuation of dialogue, continuation of this building of consensus across the world, and in particular in the global south, and this troika of Indonesia, India, and now Brazil, how they can take this conversation forward. Now, to begin with, I will just give the floor to you, Maria, to give a sense. So Luciana, to you first, to give the context of the broad engagement that perhaps you are looking from a Brazilian perspective as you take on the presidency, as the baton goes to you, and you take this conversation forward on a range of issues. So perhaps you can set the context, and I'll then invite the two Brazilian experts here to provide their inputs, and then I'll come to the broader Latin American perspective. Over to you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to bring some of the insights that we're having while you are organizing the T20 Brazil. I just want to first present the institutions that are part of this panel. I am for the Institute of Applied Economic Research, which is a governmental think tank, but autonomous governmental think tank that works with a lot of topics, international and national topics in Brazil, and not only economics, although the name is economics. And we've been part of the T20 for a quite long time. Also, CEBRI, who I think is the most antique, yes, the one that had the oldest that has been part of the T20, and Mr. Caramuru is also part of the committee representing CEBRI in this panel, and Mr. Almir is from FUNAG, who is a foundation of research and thinking that is linked to the Ministry of International Affairs. We have come together to try to start organizing the T20 in Brazil, because we have been participating in the T20, and you know that you have to do some things in advance. And what we think about this is, of course, giving continuity to what have been done by the other think tanks, mainly by Indonesia and India, in the perspective of the development countries, but bringing all the experience that we have from the T20, and going from this to the topics and that are more interesting of the Latin American and Brazil in itself. And what I'm thinking about in this sense that we have an opportunity of this troika, yes, that we have all development countries doing this process from Indonesia, India, Brazil, and South Africa. Bringing the topics of development countries to the debate is quite important, and this has been part of the debate here these 3 days. But we also think that we have to go forward in what have begun in this Indian process that we call inclusion, representativeness, and effectiveness. By inclusion, what it means that we need to bring from India on even more think tankers from the global south, think tanks from the north, but also think tanks from Latin America. So you want to engage other think tanks in this process and have participation and inclusion and engagement on this process. Besides that, you want to do, as has been done by other presidencies of T20 and G20, to engage with other engagement groups, bring them to participate and dialogue with them. We have been contacting the other engagement groups in Brazil that are starting to do this process of organization of the T20, the G20 Brazil. We want also think tanks with large experience and newcomers, as we say. We want to have the opportunity to train think tanks that are think tanks or national or regional think tanks that has not large experience in T20, but had experience in dialogue with international topics. So you are going to use this opportunity to bring what you call newcomers to the process and try to train them and making them participate in this process, including them in the debate. About how we are going to organize these, we are thinking that we have to have co-leaders with experience, co-leader chairs with large experiences, and chairs that can have experience but can be brought together with someone that has less experience to work together, and also have a gender balance in this process. We want to have participation of women as co-leader chairs and chairs as many as men if possible. And also in the process of writing the policy briefs, to have national and international think tanks doing this together. It has been experienced in other T20s, including in India, but having a representativeness of national and international think tanks in the co-leader chairs also. Besides that, we want to we are already in contact with Brazilian officials that has already been designated as the coordinators of the financial track and the Sherpa track in Brazil, and will be assuming this role from 1st of December, and we are trying to bring them to be even closer to the T20, as you have done this in India. But also, we are counting on you all to bring your Sherpas and in the financial track and the coordinators in the financial track and the Sherpa track, to bring them also even closer to the T20. Yes. We think that we might organize a council, or calling a council of National Council and International Council of the T20. These councils will have think tanks that have been working in the T20, newcomers, and what will be the role of this council? Mainly, first, disseminating, as you have done in India, what is the T20, what is T20, why it's important, how it dialogues with the other international representative organizations or other forms of organization in other, like the UN, like the IPSA, like BRICS. How do you align with all these agendas? Why is it important to the think tanks, the national think tanks, be engaged in the global issues and to be debating these global issues? Besides that, we want to have them to have a close collaboration with the agendas, the national agendas, suggesting topics for the task force. In fact, the topics from the task force will come from the G20. Yes, we want to have a close relation with the G20. It's important part of the process of the T20. But from the subtopics, we think that we can consult with these other think tanks, national and international. We know there are topics that has to go on to continue, but we want to see if there is emerging topics, new topics that might become to the agenda. In terms of the topics, as I've said earlier, we don't have yet defined all the topics, but we know that inequality, hunger, and food security will be a really important topic for Brazil. We also know that, and this also for this T20, we also know that the reform of the multilateral system is quite important and will continue to be important in the debate. Climate change and sustainability will be important. Gender equality, we don't know if it's going to be a task force, but for sure will be important in the G20 agenda in Brazil. And we are also thinking that there are topics that might not come from the G20, but you want to go and continue with them, like the digital economy, digitalization process, digital access to service, and others. So we hope to have these topics by September, although the G20 will only want to tell what are the topics in 1st of December, but we want to start to talk to the Indians from November on, and we are already talking, but start on one formal process of handover, and also from November on, and have the topics and the dialogues with other think tanks, national, international think tanks, to start the process. And when we, in fact, from 1st December on, start producing all the policy briefs and all the things that we need to to do the events, the summits, the side events, to engage the think tanks. The ones that are already engaged will be invited to continue participating, because the ones that has experience, it's fundamental that their experience continues in the participation process, yes, and also the ones that we intend to bring from national think tanks, Latin American think tanks, and other Southern voices, and other think tanks that are not being so active in participation, Northern think tanks also, how to bring them all together and continue this process of building this Global South agenda, this debate about the development agenda, and the less developed countries bring into the agenda, and also how to do dialogue with the most developed countries in the world to get together and establish some common agendas. That's, I think it's the introduction.
Thank you. No, I will request the ambassador and then Almir to add to what Luciana just said.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I want to say that it's very difficult to step on the Indian shoes, because the work done here was excellent, was brilliant. And we are very much thankful to India for all the efforts made to organize these meetings, to provide us with the comfort and all the facilities we have had here and in the 3 meetings, and to organize the agenda and the debates in a brilliant way. I want to make, Luciana said it all, I want to make just 3 brief comments. One about the agenda. Of course, the agenda of the Global South is going to be there. Not because, of a political motivation of the Global South, but because these are sensible issues to discuss. We have to discuss them, and we have to try to find solutions for many of the topics that are under discussion. Sometimes I think that we exacerbate our disagreements in terms of the agenda. We have disagreements, of course, the Global South, the T7, we have disagreements. We have disagreements perhaps on the role of the multilateral institutions and the reform of the multilateral institutions, on financial for development, the modalities, on financing the low carbon, the measures towards the low carbon economy. There are disagreements, but there are several important points of agreement, and we have to be able to explore these points in a positive way and highlight them, highlight them in our debates and to those who follow our debates outside our group. I heard yesterday President Lula speaking to a meeting of the Amazonian countries, and in a very powerful speech that he made by heart, he was not reading any text, he emphasized 2 points. One, inequality. This is something very strong in his mind. And the second point, the reform of the multilateral institutions. So we have been discussing with the public sector about their own priorities. They have not yet totally defined, and we have not totally defined ours, but I can imagine that these 2 points, having heard this speech, are going to be very important points. I think the challenge in the agenda is continuity and innovation, because we have to continue what has been done in the Indonesian T20, here in the Indian T20, but we have to be able to innovate, and we will have to be able to advance. We have to be able to go beyond that. We are very much aware that these are challenges, and we are thinking about that. We still have a few months to think more and make proposals to you, but we want you to know that this is very much in our minds. My second point is about stakeholders. We are an engagement group of the G20, and we tend to believe that, well, the purpose of our work is to influence the G20 itself and the governments and to speak to them. It's very much true that this is an essential part of our work. But I think we also have to believe as stakeholders, the private sector community, the opinion leaders, different groups that exist in our own society. Given the characteristics of the Brazilian reality, I can imagine that the press is going to follow closely what we will be discussing, and also the private sector is going to be following closely. They have already been approached us in the sense of they want to know what we are going to do, and they have very much clear in their minds that these are opportunities to pass on messages to those who take decisions. Those who take decisions at home and those who take decisions about the international reality. So we expect that these audience, these stakeholders are going to pay a lot of attention to what we will be doing in Brazil. And will be a good opportunity, I think, to pass on our own messages. It's absolutely relevant to believe that there are scholars, academics, think tanks from all over the world are discussing the international issues and making proposals. And there will be a lot of curiosity in Brazil, knowing the Brazilian press and the Brazilian reality and the Brazilian entrepreneurs about the substance of these discussions and what we were going to deliver in terms of results. My final comment is that, we don't live outside the world. And next year, there will be a number of important meetings. One of those important meetings is going to be the summit, the United Nations Summit, the Future Summit, by the Common Future Summit by the United Nations. Actually, the summit is going to happen 2 months before the G20 presidential meeting, because the summit is going to happen in September, the presidential meeting is going to happen in November. We will have to prepare our results much before that, but I can imagine there will be a lot of preparation for the summit, there will be a lot of discussion for the summit, and in a certain way we will have to pay attention to this. We will have to interact with these discussions and then have, as much as possible, a broad view internationally of what we can achieve and what we can produce at the T20. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Over to you, Almir. I think you had some messages that you wanted to convey as well.
Thank you very much. My first words are to speak in the name of the president of the Alexandre de Guzmão Foundation, Ambassador Márcia Loureiro, to congratulate the Team India for the superb job that has been done during the Indian presidency, and also to say that we are in the T20 Brazil. We are now very aware that the high standards that India set, we'll have to be able to meet those standards, and there's a challenge in that we take with gratitude. I would like to also stress that all this summit has been a very important opportunity for us to see how valuable is a T20 that can discuss, develop, and exchange ideas and discuss concepts that are also important. But this morning, there was another topic that caught my attention, is the topic of implementation. Implementation is a key word. We cannot just formulate ideas. We have more and more to think about how to put them into practice. After hearing Mrs. Luciana Servo and Ambassador Caramuru, I would like just to make a brief comment. I would like to present very quickly 3 points that I believe that would add to what has been said up to now. The first one is that, as you know, Brazil is both an Amazonian and an Atlantic country, and we are striving to advance foreign policy and cooperation in both of this area. In what concerns the Amazonian side, the reconstruction of public policy for the Amazon region is the one of the priorities announced by President Lula for his 3rd term in office. The capital of the state of Pará was chosen to host the United Nations 30th Conference on Climate Change. And as part of our preparation for this momentous task, the city will host the summit of Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, ACTO, an international organization that aims to promote sustainable development associated with preservation in the forest region. This summit will take place next week on 7th and 8th of August, and will be preceded by the Amazon Dialogues, which will bring together a set of initiatives organized by the civil societies with the aim of guiding the formulation of new strategies for this region. Such initiatives involve representatives of social movements, academia, research centers, and government agencies from Brazil and other Amazonian countries. The Alexandre de Guzmão Foundation is part of this effort, and we are co-organizing a seminar titled "The Results of the Amazon Dialogue." These results will be presented to the civil society, and the representatives of civil society will, after that, present those results to the leaders gathered at the summit. So we believe this is a special event and assuredly an opportunity for stimulating a significant participation of think tanks originating in Amazon countries in the activity to be developed by Brazil within the T20 task force. It means that we have to take the opportunity that we have for very important and world-scale meetings like this one to advance some ideas and to engage think tanks in this case. My second point is the fact that Brazil is also an Atlantic country. So Brazil hails its social cultural ties that constitute one of the main pillars of our society, and that connect us with the African continent. As Brazil aims to relaunch, better saying, the relationship with Africa, we recognize the value of our African roots and celebrate Africa's contribution to our culture and the central role of the continent's national identity. Last 25th of May, when Africa is internationally celebrated, the Day of Africa, President Lula recalled that, and I quote that, "The African Union is a source of inspiration for South America in building a unity that respects the diversity of its members." So we are all waiting for having African Union as full member of the G20, and I'm absolutely convinced that will provide a valuable opportunity to involve African think tanks in the T20 Brazil process. So in other words, what we are trying to do is to involve a relevant number of Latin American think tanks and also African think tanks. We have, as we know, within G20, that we have common challenges that can only be tackled successfully if we count on the work and contribution of as many institutions and researchers from different countries as possible. I believe it was yesterday, Mr. Sharad Sharma used a Hindu expression. I kept the concept, is the musicians' dialogue. It's when the musicians, they can speak through their instruments and they establish a superior kind of communication. I'll take note after this if someone could tell me after what the expression was, but the concept is perfect to express this. We believe that as long as we have as many participants as possible, we'll improve the dialogues and we can try and we'll eventually reach the solutions we expect. My third and last point is that is another thing that I took notice during this summit, once again, is the importance of the term implementation. And this point was raised this morning during the discussion of the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. We are fully aware that many countries face the risk of not implementing them within the initially agreed time frame, for all reasons that were extensively presented during that panel. But once again, T20 Brazil and work to be delivered by the task forces constitute an opportunity to continue the effort of precedent T20 editions. And I would like to stress that, the importance of continuity, to promote discussion and presentation of ideas in the pursuit of attainment of the agreed upon objectives. So we are also fully aware that the success of T20 Brazil will depend also on its capacity for nurturing a meaningful dialogue, not only with the Sherpa and financial tracks, but also with the various engagement groups of G20, a point that was stressed by Mrs. Luciana Servo a few minutes ago. We shall take advantage that T20 is a multifaceted group to develop a better and more intense dialogue in all levels. That is key for the results we are expecting for. I would end this brief presentation stressing that there is no surprise at all that we live in a polarized, complex, and unpredictable world. Not only governments, but also society needs the input to think about and adopt the necessary measures to face these challenging new circumstances. In this aspect, think tanks have here an important and irreplaceable role to play. We all saw how T20 India was successful in presenting new ways and ideas in all its task forces. And as a member of T20 Brazil organizing committee, I am sure that all the three institutions here represented aim to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that gives us a good sense of Brazil's priorities and how the organizational process is likely to move forward. From Brazil to Latin America, now can I invite you, Maria, to talk a bit, because a lot of this was about, we have talked a lot about Africa, we have talked a lot about various parts of the world looking at the G20 process through their lens. Now when G20 is being hosted by Brazil in your part of the world, how do you look at Brazil's presidency and also the role that perhaps G20 can play in today's context where multilateralism is fraying, as we've been saying all along these past few years, as well as in the past few days. So from your perspective, how do you look at this particular presidency? And of course, are there specific priorities for you that you want Brazil to take on behalf of Latin America as a whole?
Well, thank you very much. And everything we heard was music to our ears, I think. Of course, my home country, Ecuador, is not going to join G20 yet. So that's not why I am here. I'm part of the community, a non-G20 country from Latin America. So I feel privileged to be here having this exchange. And basically, three key messages. The number one, I think that we have a one in a lifetime opportunity to change the narrative about the Global South in general. And as a poet, I can say that narratives and words matter. And the truth is, when we say the Global South, first of all, I agree with, in one of the panels today, they said the Global South is not a monolithic entity. We are very diverse, we have very different agendas, different traditions, cultures, but we have some things in common. But when you say the Global South, you say, the poor, the needy, the people needing help, etc. No, we have to help the Global South, and the truth is, Indonesia, India, Brazil, and South Africa have the opportunity to change the narrative about the Global South in a way that when you say the Global South, you immediately think the world of opportunity, the world of wealth, the world where the critical resources are, the mega diverse countries, the culturally diverse countries, the world of innovation and opportunity. And I think that conceptual shift is perhaps one of the most important things, because it's chapter one of understanding the new geopolitics and the polycentric multipolar world. So I think that has started. I really wish that Brazil will continue with that flip of the narrative, flip of the meaning, flip of the metaphors when we address the Global South. Number two, I think that thinking more about the role of the T20, sometimes we think, and I've been in both sides of the coin, working for government, that think tanks, of course, it's collective intellect, the world of ideas, the world of creativity and possibility. And sometimes we forget the part of strategy and tactics to make sure that whatever we produce has an impact in decision makers. It becomes real policy, tangible change on the ground. And I think that's also a part where we perhaps need to work a little more. And the verbs I would use is sustain, boost, and innovate. And I'm totally with you. Sustain the huge, enormous legacy of the Indian presidency. Boost the initiatives that have emerged from here. And of course, I'm biased, but I really wish that women's rights and gender equality really has a cross-cutting presence throughout the efforts that are made. And of course, innovate. And I had a list of themes, and it's also music to our ears to listen, to address the issue of inequalities. This is critical. It's critical for Latin America. We are, unfortunately, the second most unequal region in the entire planet. And this cannot continue in a way. We say that Latin America suffers from a double trap, and the double trap is slow growth and high inequality. And I think that there are formulas to in a way, overcome that. In terms of innovation of the way we do work, I think that Luciana was very clear on what is the structure, what is the choreography that you're thinking. And perhaps a few recommendations should be, we first need more interaction and more dialogue between the working groups, but between the different themes, to connect the new financial architecture with the climate discussion, with a women-led development conversation, with a digital inclusion and innovation section, that kind of cross-working group conversations. But we also need greater conversation and interaction with the other engagement groups. I know that logistically it's very complicated and challenging, but we had a small exercise of that in Goa, where the working group on women-led development was meeting, and then a meeting with the W20, the C20, and other 20s that were there to discuss the issue of women's rights. And believe me that it was incredibly enriching to have that cross-engagement group discussion. And perhaps looking again at Latin America, I really appreciate the engagement with non-G20 groups. You mentioned Africa, you mentioned the Amazonian countries, you mentioned Latin America. I strongly believe that Latin America as a continent and the Caribbean need to go back to the global stage to discuss global issues. We have been, for more than a decade, absent of the global conversation. And we look at Brazil as a means, as a bridge, to allow Latin America and the Caribbean to come together and make sure that we come back to the global stage in a way. Not to discuss issues of Latin America only, but to discuss global issues. And that leads me perhaps to my final point on multilateralism and UN reform and reform of the international financial architecture. The truth is that I follow very closely the process, the organization of the Summit of the Future, the different tracks of the reform of the United Nations. And the truth is that we need the G20 to have a louder voice, to be more engaged, to be more vocal, to serve as an engine, to serve as an energy box to make it happen. Because in my 30 plus years of experience in the multilateral system, I have never seen such a traction and a momentum to be serious about transforming the multilateral system. I think we should really invest, the G20 should invest time in having a loud voice as we prepare for the summit of the future. And if you allow me a few words more about India. And of course, I had notes here for the need of a global tax pact, of discussing seriously the issue of debt and sustainable development. You know that almost 80% of countries in Latin America are in debt distress, and they invest more in debt service than in health or education. This is a serious matter, and I think we need to consider. But just perhaps a final word on T20 and India. This is the last session of the T20, but it's not the end of our collective work. And I think that the entire T20 process, and I'm new to this family, I have to say, has been, an incredible intellectual and human experience. And I would like to publicly thank the T20 Secretariat, ORF, the chairs, the government of India, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for this, and thank the thousands of souls and minds that are behind this effort. And it has not only been about content, but about form as well, about the voices, the youth participating, about the colors and the culture. And I think we should really appreciate as we look at the future. And the future starts today, actually. And we have just started our collective work and co-creating this collective intelligence to build a better world. So thank you very much for that, for really showing in practice what people's diplomacy is about, people's G20 can be about, and what the T20 has taught us collectively. So thank you, and very much looking forward to Brazil.
Thank you, Maria. And we are running out of time, but there's very brief comments from all of you. I think Maria's last point being involving as many stakeholders as possible. And India, perhaps, as I think Dr. Jaishankar yesterday mentioned, for India it has been a process of bringing Indians to the global public and engaging the other way around as well. So in terms of Brazil, Ambassador, if you can briefly articulate, is a similar thinking process going on, that this is perhaps a right time for not only bringing Brazil to the world, but also Latin America to global conversations that are happening, both in terms of reforming, as you mentioned, the multilateral order, multilateral frameworks, multilateral development institutions, but also being part of global conversations from which perhaps, as Maria pointed out, Latin America has not been engaged with for some time. Very briefly, sir.
Well, very briefly, I have to confess that we are very much thinking about our own problems, and we should pay much more attention to the international reality than we do. And I think an occasion such as the T20 would help to broaden our minds, to open the discussions, and to bring in more people to discuss these topics and pay attention to what should be done.
Luciana, for you, in terms of the outcomes that you're looking from, you explained in great detail the choreography of how Brazil is thinking about the structures and processes. But in terms of concrete outcomes, some of this was mentioned, particularly coming from Latin American experience about inequality, hunger, poverty, some very deep-rooted challenges there. How are you looking to push this agenda at a time when we have also talked about this aspect, when geopolitical contestation is perhaps preventing a large part of the world from actually managing some of these challenges, which for a large part of the world are real and happening in real time. Is there a program of action there? Is there a sense that we can deliver and we can implement, as I think Almir was mentioning, some of the challenges or some of the ideas that have been on the table for quite some time? So is there some thinking going on in that regard as well, or is it still too early to discuss this?
I think we have had the experience of going forward in respect of these topics in Brazil and then backwards. Yes, it's quite clear for us that we have to really accelerate this process and make it sustainable. Because if you go forward and backwards all the time, it would be impossible for maintaining. So besides accelerating the SDGs, I think how to sustain this process, I think what has been discussed in this early section, how to sustain this process, that we don't go backwards as we have done with the crisis that we have, with the debts, with the problems that we have in financing, with the problems that we have in our own economies. But in fact, I think this is an international problem. It's not a local problem. It's not a national problem. And how we are going to engage the T20 even more in this agenda of hunger and poverty and have a plan of action that goes from structure and sustainability and inclusiveness is our main challenge. And from going from what you have done here, that is amazing, and forward. And for us, for sure, bringing Latin America into the debate, bringing other institutions from Brazil to the debate is an achievement that we want to accomplish in this T20. And bringing Brazilians to know more about Asia and India and Africa and all these things is fundamental. I think most of the Brazilians, even the researchers are quite engaged in the national agendas, as Mr. Caramuru said. So having this accomplishment to bring the global topics to the debate in Brazil, to the global topics to the debate in Latin America, I think will be important for us also. And I also want to think in 15 seconds, to really thank you, because it was a learning process from the beginning and till now. And I think we'll have much to learn from India and from Indonesia, but we have already been talking to the support that we need from India and from the other think tankers and institutions that are here, that are engaged in the T20 for a long time. So we're really counting on your support for doing the T20. Brazil has been as successful as India has been. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Almir, last question to you as we wrap this up. Maria made a very interesting point about changing the narrative about Global South. And I think, Indonesia, India, Brazil, and South Africa have this enormous opportunity of reshaping or reconfiguring the way we talk about Global South, because I think she was right that we talk about Global South in terms that perhaps do not reflect today's aspirations in the Global South. So is it something that Brazil would be pushing or engaged with through this process? Because that's something which I think we have seen in the last few years emerge as one of the key themes in these geographies, where demographics are changing, where aspirations are changing, where increasingly I think Global South wants to look at its own role differently in global politics.
Thank you very much. But Brazil is really eager to help in changing those narratives. We are in this situation of being a real complex and unpredictable world, because we have to begin changing some narratives. Brazil is doing, I believe, this work in this sense. We are redesigning public policies. We are establishing new bridges. We are really wanting to be part of a solution in this aspect. So I think that bringing Latin America, bringing Africa, bringing as many participants as possible, it will help to change the narrative in the benefit of all. It's not just the benefits of these regions mentioned. It's in the benefit of the entire world. That's what we are looking for. And I believe that T20 Brazil will be working very hard with your help, with your assistance to attain those goals.
Thank you very much. It was an excellent conversation about the future of T20 and G20 process as we take this forward, and wishing Brazil all the luck and wishing Latin America all the luck as we take this conversation forward. Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us.